Hi everybody, I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we are ThinkerThemer, and we are big fans of trick-taking games on this channel, so we're excited to have an early preview copy of The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, a trick-taking game designed by Brian Bormuller.
So in this game, we're going to be closely following the adventures of the book, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring, where we're going to be starting with Frodo having the ring and being tasked with taking it to Mount Doom to have it destroyed. We are not fans of the IP, so forgive us if we're going to be, if we make some mistakes along the way.
That's
it's
as
bound
deep
to happen.
as it gets.
That is as deep as it gets. So we are going to be taking on different roles of the different characters that appear throughout the book, and the game will evolve as we progress through different chapters, and new threats and adventures and different elements are thrown in. Because of its cooperative nature, the whole idea is that we're going to have to work together to help each other meet the individual objectives that we're all trying to achieve.
Now, the first thing I'll say about this game is they fit a lot in quite a little box, because as you open it, you'll see that you have a deck of cards that will be here on the left, and then you've got part 1 and part 2, which has all of the different chapters that you're essentially going to unlock as your group of players are able to progress through the objectives of each stage. We, of course, don't want to give away too many spoilers, so we're just going to talk about Chapter 1 when I explain the mechanics. So firstly, I'll just give you a bit of an overview of how this trick-taking game works. I'm not going to explain trick-taking, there's lots of great videos that do that out there, but essentially this is a must-follow trick-taking game, and it's cooperative in nature. So the lead player is going to play a card of a given suit, and everybody must follow that suit if they're able. Now, there's an interesting suit in this game, which are the rings, and they have a different distribution of cards. So the other suits are 1 to 8, but the rings are 1 to 5. That's not the only interesting thing about them, because the one of rings, the one ring to rule them all, I believe that's from this IP. This one ring is particularly powerful because it can act as the trump in a game if you want it to. So the player who plays this can decide whether they want to win the trick or not. Now, it has another interesting power in that generally speaking, when you deal out the cards to all of the players around the table, the person who has the one ring is going to lead the trick, and they're going to take on the lead character of Frodo. Now, let's use the 3-player side of this card, because even in a 2-player game, you're going to simulate a 3rd player, which I'll talk about and come back to later on. But let's assume we're playing a 3-player game. Everyone has a hand of cards, and then my objective is to win 4 or more rings cards. Now, the other interesting thing about rings cards is that they can't be played until somebody uses them within a trick by playing off suit. From that point onwards, this ring token gets turned over by Frodo, and now that indicates that rings are able to lead a trick. So in this game, for example, I really want other people to have rings so that when I win a trick, they can, discard all of their rings and help me achieve my objective. Now, the chapters are really interesting. So whenever we start a new chapter, so for example, in chapter 1, there's a bit of a thematic intro to what's happening in this chapter in the book. And then we have the instructions on the other side of the card that are going to tell us the cast of characters that we need to set up in order for people to be able to select a character that they're going to take on in each attempt at finishing this chapter. There will also be a victory condition. So in this chapter 1, we need to finish all of the chosen characters. So in this chapter, we're going to have Frodo, Bilbo, Gandalf, and Pippin. And so we create a market of those cards. The person who's going to get Frodo has the one of rings in their hand, but then from that person clockwise, everyone's going to choose a character after they've seen their hand. And that is important because all of these characters have different conditions they need to meet. So for example, Gandalf wants to win 1 or more tricks, fairly easy, just 1 or more, whereas Pippin wants to win the fewest number of tricks, and Bilbo wants to win 3 or more tricks. So if you had a particularly powerful hand, you might want to hope that they leave Bilbo behind so that you can take that character. Now remember, to win this chapter, everybody needs to meet their objective, but not every character is necessarily going to be in the game, because in the chapter there's a little little asterisk to tell you which characters must be drafted as part of this chapter. So in this example, it's only Frodo and Bilbo. So in a 3-player game, we would have the option of including Gandalf or Pippin. Each character will have a setup associated with each of them, and a lot of the time that involves exchanging cards with other characters. And that's an important part of the game as well, because in order to achieve your objective, you often need to shed some cards, and hopefully the person you're passing that card to understands your objective enough to give you something that will be useful to you. Now, if you pass the chapter, you move on to the next chapter, and as you move through part 1 and part 2 of this game, they do become more and more complex. So the characters that are joining you are going to have more difficult win conditions, but there's also really interesting things that happen in terms of the suits coming in and out. There's another deck of cards that's going to add a little bit of random chance to every round. There's other little items that you're going to find along the way that somehow interact with the characters and what their objectives are. So there is plenty to discover in each of those boxes. So that's a bit of an overview of how it plays. The first thing I'll probably talk about is people might be wondering what it's like at 2-player, and this game actually has like quite a fascinating 2-player mode.
Yeah, it introduces this sort of pyramid, which is going to be the cards. It's played out the cards of this third player that will be controlled by another player. But as you can see in that sort of Seven Wonders duel style, the pyramid only has certain cards that are freely available. Some of them are locked and also hidden, so you don't even know what they're going to be. And some of them you can see, but you're not going to be able to access for a while. So all that would be happening is as we're playing, you're able to, the player that's going to be managing that extra character will be able to kind of draft cards from the ones that are readily available. Once cards are removed, obviously anything that is now free will flip over, and they will also be available to be drafted and be played as part of tricks.
I thought this was actually a really interesting way to implement a third player.
Yeah.
And it was fun to control that as well, because you could see what was coming. So it gives you enough foresight to know, okay, well, maybe this character needs to win the last trick and they've got a 6 over there. And so we need to get rid of the 7 and 8 of red at some point and hope that that character will be leading the last trick and can win with that 6. So you're trying to plan ahead, but of course you can't really communicate that with the other player.
Yeah, so it's technically really meant to be one person who has then the role and potential burden of being the sole manager of that other character. If you were to kind of play it completely cooperatively in the sense of like just, we can discuss it, it becomes a lot easier, obviously, because then, there's too much information.
I would actually say that at 2 players, this game is fairly easy. And because you are controlling that third player, so you have a lot more information than you would if you were playing with 3 real opponents.
Human opponents.
But we actually played a lot of this game at 3 players and 4 players. We actually made it all the way through almost to the end of part 2. And then, of course, Maggie and I played some of this in the 2-player mode. So most of our experience was at 3 or 4. And just like games like The Crew, if you've played games like The Crew, of course, the more players you have introduces more variability.
More room for error.
And more objectives that you need to meet, because everyone has now a character. So you've got to be thinking about, in a 4-player game, there are 4 separate objectives here, and how do we piece together that so that everyone can achieve their objectives. And I really enjoyed it at 4, actually. I thought 3 was really nice too, but 4 was super challenging, and it was really fun to, just like The Crew, play through with the same group of people, because you all get better at the game as it increases in difficulty.
I feel like 4 is the most challenging player count. 3 felt to me like the most comfortable in terms of like that balance between challenging but also that cooperative feel. 2 felt more like, we're just sort of exploring the story in a fairly like kind of low stakes way.
Yeah, and also there are some chapters, so this is another dynamic with player count. Usually we don't start with player count, but this one is interesting at 2 players and, quite variable across the player counts. But the victory condition can either be short or long in this game. Short means you need to finish all of your chosen characters, and the long chapters require you to finish all of the characters. And so that means that, in game 1, we might be able to complete 2 or 3, And then we've got to play another round in order to pick the other characters that were left over until you've completed them all, which means that one chapter can take several rounds of the same mechanics. So at 2 players, when you stumble upon one of those long victory conditions, it takes a lot longer because it's still got the same characters, but you need to play multiple rounds in order to get through that chapter.
So obviously, a lot of people, most people that are going to be immediately drawn to this is probably because they're fans of the IP, of the Lord of the Rings as the setting and the theme. That was something that, like, we're not really fans of that IP, so it was a little bit foreign to us. However, having played the first few kind of rounds with someone who was kind of knowledgeable of that,
it's
was
Alex
really...
from Board Game Co. who is a big fan of the IP.
And Taylor as well. Like, we actually had Taylor
Taylor
from Taylor's Trick Taken Table, who was actually one of the developers as well for the game. So that being able to kind of understand, thematically what's happening in the story at this point and how that links to the objectives of the different characters and the particular quirks that each character has. Like, that was really fascinating and added a whole other layer of of interest and meaning and purpose, at least for me.
Yeah, and when you are not a fan of the IP, or you just are not familiar with what's happening from chapter to chapter, it's a little bit harder. So I really like that when I first started getting into this game, I completely, I've seen the movies at some point a long time ago, and just knowing that much and looking at the beautiful artwork. So this stained glass window effect is just so stunning in this game. And the rings are really awesome. We know that that's like central to the storyline. And the way that that plays out with the one ring and all of those elements, the characters as well, I think that has been really, really well done. But what I found was, as we made our way through the different parts and through the different chapters, I kind of lost my way a little bit about what was happening in the game. And I'm sure if you're a fan of the series, you would straight away be like, that's because this, you can connect the dots. That's because this was happening, and that's why we have this new suit, or that's why this is happening with the mechanics. And I'm sure the items that come in as well are very thematic. But what we did find was that the explanation on each chapter starts to become a little bit esoteric as you move through. It is written in a way that is a little bit difficult to comprehend what's happening if you're not familiar with the IP. There's a lot of just I don't think there are direct quotes from the book, but they're certainly they read like part of a chapter.
It's almost like a vague poem, flavor of the chapter, but it doesn't actually give you a sense of wait, so what's actually happening, and how does that link to this? Not that you need it to spell it out, but even just knowing, Frodo has now this and that, and there's this challenge ahead. That would have been enough.
Yes,
this is just more a bit of a ooh, which is I think, again, if you're a fan of the IP, you'll be like, ooh, yeah, I know exactly what that's alluding to. But if you're not, you're just I'm just really lost.
Yeah, and it's disappointing in a way because the mechanics are so interesting, but you can't make that link between theme and mechanics if you're not familiar with the IP. And so I do wish that they were in this chapter, Frodo's gone off to do something else. That's why he's not present in this chapter. And I'll be okay, that makes sense. Or, a challenge has come up, or, and it was just the writing is a little bit too dense in order to figure out what's happening. So I really wish that was a bit stronger, but I want to talk about at least what's happening mechanically as you move through, because it does become more interesting. There are different decks of cards, and I really like the way that is staged through these part 1 and part 2. It gives you a sense of momentum and a goal to get through. So, there is
in a sense of discovery, because it's I wonder what's going to happen next, or what's going to be introduced.
Yeah, and so sometimes there would be a new card that is an event-like card where you read it out to everybody, and that's exciting because it introduces something new. Again, even the event cards it's a bit hard to piece together the story from those.
It really needs a companion story booklet. So I haven't checked in BGG, but this would be something that as a fan, you would be able to kind of create and go, hey, download this like little companion guide, so that chapter by chapter you get a little bit of a summary of like, in the book, this is what's happening. So
and that's why mechanically it's like this. But you know, I feel like through part 1 there were a lot of those surprises. Part 2, it does start to feel a little bit more repetitive, but I think there's enough variability in here, and certainly for a box of this size, that it's going to really satisfy a group of players, because it does give you that sense of wanting to play through the whole thing. And our friends that we played with were super excited to get this to the table, and then they just kept wanting to come back and play more episodes. And you know, that's what board gamers love. When their friends who aren't really board gamers are excited to come back and play more
reel
games.
them in with anything, whatever it takes.
So that part of it was fantastic.
So I feel like if you've got friends or you yourself are into the IP of Lord of the Rings, there's going to be so much game. Even if you're like, I just want to explore through the story, and if we don't pass a particular chapter, we'll just kind of keep moving. Even if you do that, there's quite a lot of game in this little box.
There is, and there's a way to continue playing it, even ignoring the chapters, so you can just jump back in at any point. I wouldn't, and that's a personal preference, not because I don't like this game, I really love it, but if I was to start again, I'd start with a new group of people and start from chapter 1, because I really like the building of skills as, you know, people get to experience it increasing in difficulty, and that's like the exciting part to me. And it's the same with the crew. I wouldn't just pick up the crew to play a random chapter or play it, you know, without the narrative. I enjoy moving through it, and I have to say this is far more thematic than the crew.
Light years more thematic, because I felt like in the crew it ends up just being like this sort of random combo of more and more challenging missions and scenarios that you're kind of having to, or objectives that you're having to complete. Here it's like, like again, particularly if you know how it maps to the actual story. Even if you don't, it's just like just having those characters and having the particular, it's like without giving many spoilers, some of the things that get introduced and the types of cards that get introduced, and even the types of kind of, let's say, areas that you might be, settings that you might be encountering or visiting, that immediately makes you much more immersed in like, oh, this is an actual world that we're playing within. I'll also briefly mention there is a solo mode, which I haven't actually played, but it's essentially you're playing a 4-hand version. So you're playing four different characters, and you have limited information for each one. So there's going to essentially be some visible information for each of the characters. Obviously, you know what their objectives are, but as you're playing, more cards will be revealed. So that sort of gives that element of like, ooh, you don't fully know all of the information as you get going. The reason I haven't really gone into that is because I'm the type of person that struggles with like managing automas, and this already feels like there's a lot of like, there's 4 particular different objectives that you're having to stay on top of, plus then all those. I feel like then the type of puzzle is not really the type of puzzle that I enjoy. But again, if you're a solo player and you like that type of puzzle, know that this has been catered for you.
Now, so overall, what do we think about this game? I'm sorry that we can't show you more without giving you spoilers, but essentially we are not cooperative players. The first hurdle for us is getting over that, and I didn't feel at all like that was a hurdle. I really, really enjoyed trying to piece together all of the different characters. I found it very thematic when I was playing, which normally I don't care too much about, but I did like that you're embodying a character. I really like that whoever has that one ring becomes Frodo, and kind of that adds a bit of structure to the game. I just love all the thought that's gone into the mechanics and how they evolve. And so for me, I really enjoyed this experience, and I think that anybody who enjoyed the crew is probably going to find this to be like really exciting. For me, the co-op element holds it back a little bit, because when, you know, if you watch the channel, for me, trick-taking games, my favorite ones, like Schadenfreude or Knock
they're really mean ones.
They're not mean, they're interactive. They're interactive.
And it's code for taking you down.
No, there's ways that to subtly kind of try and manipulate other players' scoring.
Down.
Down. But here, of course, you're working together. And I enjoyed that too. And I really love the joy that it brought to players around the table. So I'm going to give this an 8. I think it is like really brilliant. And I just think this is going to make so many people happy.
Yeah, well, I agree. I think particularly if you're a fan of the IP, you're going to have an incredible time with this. I found myself way much more thematically immersed than in many other trick-taking games. Definitely, yeah, I agree that the cooperative component, which is usually a bit of like it's usually a barrier for me. I didn't actually mind it as much. It was like, oh yeah, it kind of makes sense in this context, and I was actually really enjoying myself with this process. For me, it's actually going to be a 7.8. The reason for that is I enjoy it. I think it's super clever in terms of the things that it's brought in. The reason it's not higher is because, again, missing that link to what's actually happening in the story meant that as we evolve and kind of went through different chapters, it started becoming a little bit more vague in that it's like, well, now it just feels like I'm doing an objective, but I don't really know how it connects.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So yeah, so that would be the main, and it did start feeling a little bit more kind of repetitive, partly because of that reason. So I think having that companion booklet, which again, hopefully a fan will be able to, maybe there's already one, I haven't checked on BGG. I think that would really help someone like me feel more engaged throughout the entire campaign.
Yeah, so we hope you enjoyed this review. The game is coming out, I believe, in January. So, you know, check out their website, Asmodee's website, if you're interested. If you enjoyed this review, please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.